Hey, everybody. Welcome to Live with Kevin on a Friday. Happy to have you with me today. And today's live is brought to you by Virtual LeaderCon, which is our upcoming virtual leadership development broadcast. Unlike any other kind of virtual conference or event you've been to before, it's sort of a mashup between live television and the best professional development conference. All the details can be found at virtualleadercon.com. You can have the chance to interact with over 30 leadership experts over the course of 5 days from September the 14th through the 18th. Access to all of them live, or most all of them live, during the live broadcast, and lots of ways to engage then and ways to get the content for yourself long-term, both audio, video, and a transcript. So welcome. Today, we're going to talk about, as promised, if you just showed up, you didn't know, we're going to talk about 3 things remote leaders need to do now. I bring this to you because I am a remote leader, but I bring this to you because I'm talking with remote leaders every day, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from other organizations so far this morning or today. And so I'm having the chance to coach and help and listen to and observe what's going on with remote leaders literally around the world. And I want to share with you 3 things that you as a remote leader need to be doing now, right now. And I'm going to talk about all those things here in a second. But first, I need to give you the context. By the way, I have my glasses on today, if you're not used to seeing me with glasses, because I have a bunch of notes of the things I want to share with you. And if I don't have the glasses on, I'll be lucky if I can read my notes anyway. But before we get to the 3 things, there's underlying context that I have to share with you. And here it is. I've been saying this to people for a while now, that what's happening during this pandemic, during this lockdown, whatever you want to call it, that we are all experiencing the same thing, but we're all having different experiences. And so that, just to give you a little inside baseball, as a person who's trying to be a consultant and coach to others, I need to remind myself of this, because I know that any of you that are watching me live or later, the reality is that I don't know exactly how you're experiencing it. I do have the experience of having talked with a lot of people, and having a team myself. So I have a good sense of what some of those different experiences are. But the reality is that we must start as a leader with this idea. We are experiencing the same thing, but having different experiences. And that can be on the high level of some people are trying to, maybe they're going to have to teach school and work. Talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Maybe they're living all alone and they're getting no interaction. Or maybe they're dealing with the virus in their family, have dealt with the virus itself in their family, or any of 100 other things. And so the reality is that it's important for us to keep this in mind. Okay. And so everything I'm going to share with you about what you can be doing as a leader right now starts with this point. So 3 things. Here's the first one. And that is that we, as leaders, need to be balancing the work and people needs. Here's the thing. As a leader, always and forever, we've needed to think about the fact that we are trying to reach outcomes with and through others. So we've got a balance of work and people, outcomes and others, tasks and people, tasks and teams. We could go right on down the list and talk about all of those things. And one of the things that you've had to deal with, and if you haven't, you will, is how do we take care of our people, give them flexibility? Let's say you've got someone that's going to be having to basically be the extra teacher for their school-age children and try and get their work done. Are they able to work at different times of the day? Can they take a chunk of the day out in the middle? Those are the kinds of practical questions that you have to ask yourself. And I can't answer what your individual or organizational strategies will be, but you are going to have to be flexible. And I think the key is that we have to, number one, know what the business needs are. And my experience is that in the first, say, 60 or 90 days of all of this change, what most organizations would do was we're getting the daily workout. We figured out how to make remote work, at least kind of, and we were getting out the daily work and still hopefully meeting the people's needs. But now, when we know that this is going to go on longer, we have to not only be able to take care of those needs, those business needs today, but we've got to start thinking about projects and long-term planning and all those other things, which takes a new level of commitment and time, perhaps, and focus from our team members. So we've got to balance those business or organizational needs with the needs of our folks and where they're at and how they're doing. So we need to know what the people's needs are, and we need to know what the work is, and we need to be able to prioritize both. And remember that we're talking here about the word balance, which means prioritizing doesn't necessarily mean it's about the people and we're going to let the work fade. It doesn't also mean this is about the work and ignore the people. Balancing anything means a moving balance. And so I'd encourage you to think about that both on a daily basis. How do we adjust for people? On a weekly basis, and perhaps on a longer or quarterly basis? How do we make these adjustments? We have to be thinking about this in all these ways. And while leaders and managers have always had to do this balancing at some level, it is a whole new world now, right? And so the challenge for you now is, how do we do it now? And since I don't know your exact situation, I can't give you specific answers, but what I can do is please make sure that you engage your team in that. Engaging them in that will help you understand their needs better. It will allow the team to help each other, and in many cases that will happen. And the other thing it will do is, by engaging them in the solution, you're building their ownership in the problem. By engaging them in the solution, you're building their ownership in the problem, which means what? That they're going to understand those work needs better and likely become more committed to those, even if this balance is going to be hard to reach. So first thing that we've got to be doing as a leader today, and we can be thinking about it right now in the moment, as well as over the next several months, is how do we be flexible? How do we balance the work and the people needs? The second thing that we need to do is we have got to be empathetic as leaders. I wrote about on my blog this past week that why now is the age of empathy. And we can talk about all the reasons why that's true. Like, we're living in a more polarized world than most of us can remember. We're living in a world where people are hurting both mentally and psychologically and physically. They're dealing with. So one of the reasons I call now the age of empathy is that I think all of us at some level know that we need to be more empathetic because of all of the stuff that's going on around us. I think we sort of know that. It's the age of empathy because if we know it, now's our chance to practice it. And if we know it's needed, now's the time that we must do it. And so just a few things to help you think about that. First is, to be empathetic starts with listening. We can't know how other people are feeling or what other people are experiencing without listening to them. Now, listening alone isn't empathy, but I don't think we can get to empathy without listening. And so that means we can't just listen. We need to listen with our ears, of course. We need to listen with our eyes. This is a little harder when people are remote from us, but man, we ought to be using the webcam like I'm using right now, whenever and however we can. And we can listen with we have that sense if we're interacting with our teams about how things are going, but we can't really be empathetic by that alone. We must ask. We must ask people how they're doing. We must ask people what's working. We must ask people to know what's going on with their kids, as one example. If we don't ask, we might not find out. When we do ask, we have the chance to learn something. And when we do ask, we're starting to build trust with that other person. Now, not everyone will immediately answer or give you a lot of information. That depends on a lot of other factors. But one thing is true: when we start to ask, we start to change how this all works. And so by asking, we're opening the door. By asking, it's a trust building thing. And by asking, we have the chance to actually learn something about how people are feeling, what they're experiencing, and what they need right now. One of the reasons that leaders don't want to ask these questions is they know they don't have answers, or they don't know how to help. And while it's nice to be able to help and it's nice to have answers, to be empathetic means to simply ask and understand, to acknowledge. We don't have to solve. We do not have to, we don't have to solve for sure, but we also shouldn't be judging. Just ask to understand. Ask so people are heard, and ask as a way of acknowledging where they're at. Now, I would say this, that as a leader, you need to hear that people want your ears, not just your answers, right? They want your acknowledgement and not just they want your acknowledgement and your attention more than they want answers. So listen, ask to understand and acknowledge, not to judge, and not to solve. And make sure, by the way, that we're asking first. Because let's say I'm having a meeting, and today I'm having at least 3 meetings with members of my team. They're on my calendar yet today. And in each case, they're a scheduled meeting. And in each case, there are tasks and there are lists of things that I want to talk to them about. But I also know that there are things that they want to talk about. But if wherever we start there, and by the way, I'd start with their list rather than mine, but even if we go right into the tasks, there's no chance to be empathetic. So ask first about their feelings. Ask first about what's going on, if at all possible, because if you don't, you may run out of time and we don't get to the stuff that allows you to be empathetic. And the last thing is, while I am suggesting that we should acknowledge and not judge, I am also suggesting that we can grant people some grace, that we can be patient with people if they're struggling, and we can help them in part by simply listening. Now, I want you to note that, especially if you're just joining us, that the first of the 3 things I want you to do is to balance the work and the people needs. And if you notice now, by being empathetic, you know a lot more about the people's needs, because we don't want to just balance what are the work responsibilities or the requirements with people's needs in general, but like exactly where people actually are. The more specific we can be about that, the more helpful we can be to our folks. And by the way, while I do have these ideas, these 3 things I want to share with you. I should have said this earlier. If you have questions, just ask. If you're on here live with me, you can put them in the comments in whichever platform you're in. I'll be happy to answer them. And I will say too that if you're watching later and not live, put the comments in as well, because we'll monitor. We'll try to get back to you with some answers. Okay, so I hope you'll do that. Third thing, we said there are 3 things. First, balance your work and the needs of the work and the needs of the organization with the needs of the people. And then second, to be empathetic. And then third, you've got to take care of yourself. Now, I am a remote leader, and I have been for a decade. Now I'm a hybrid leader, a leader of a hybrid team, because I have, let me back up. Normally, I am a leader of a hybrid team. Now I'm a leader of a remote team. Everybody's gone. I've had one person in the office about 4 or 5 days to do specific work since the lockdowns began in March. And I've had 2 other team members pop in for something a couple times when I wasn't even here. Other than that, I've been remote. I am working in the office. I'm at Remarkable House, but I've been remote. And so even though I've had a largely remote team for a very long time, I have been experiencing this somewhat differently than before. So I guarantee you that if you are doing it for the first time, there are challenges. Because the first thing is, as a leader, you're also a member of a team, which means that all of the other stuff that your team members may be having to experience, you're having to experience as well. So you have your own challenges and issues and anxieties and stress on top of leading and adding all of the complexity and uncertainty that comes with doing it all remotely today. My point is, I get it. And I'm telling you this, you can't give your best to your team if you're not at your best. And maybe you can't be at your best every day. Probably can't be. But if we're not even close, we can't even come close to helping our team. So what are some things that we can do to take care of ourselves? Well, let me say first that last item about being empathetic, when we are outwardly focused, are giving to others, it actually is healthy for us. And so being other focused, being empathetic, focusing on the needs of others actually is good for us and therapeutic for us. And yet we got to have something in the tank. It can help fill the tank, probably won't do it alone. I'll also say that everyone for months now has been talking about social distancing, which I don't like. I'm not saying that we shouldn't stay apart because of the virus. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I wish that someone would have started, whoever first coined social distancing, if they would have called it physical distancing, because we are social beings. And if we are socially distant, it is going to be harder. So remember that while you are physically distanced, you don't have to be socially distanced. And so one of the ways to take care of yourself is make sure you're getting your relationship needs met at work and at home with those around you. And know that when you're doing that for you, you're probably helping them as well. Taking care of yourself means doing the things mom taught you. Eating better, eating right? More carrots and less sugar, right? I need that advice myself many days, especially unless I don't have to count ice cream. Then maybe that'd be better. But what did mom teach us? Eat right, get sleep, exercise, and many people stretch. A lot of people aren't doing those things. You may be sitting far too much. Make sure you're getting up in between meetings, between all of the Zoom calls. Make sure, like right now, you're watching me live or later, and you're probably sitting. So maybe even while you're watching me, just stand up. I can't do it because I'll be out of the picture and it won't look so good. But we ought to be doing the stuff that mom taught us, right? And most of all, taking care of ourselves means we've got to fill our own bucket. Do the things that feed you. If that's spending time with a hobby, are you doing that? If that's reading certain kinds of things, are you doing that? If that is that exercise piece, are you doing that? If that is feeding your sourdough bread starter, are you doing that? Do the things that feed you, that fill up your bucket. Because if your bucket's empty, you can't help anybody else. Got to have self-care as a part of this process. I'm going to give you 3 more things about this before I start to wrap up. One of them is that I've already said that I encourage you to grant grace to others. You got to make sure you grant some grace to yourself. This is hard. Leading is hard. Leading remotely is hard. Leading remotely during a pandemic is even harder. You don't have to have it all perfect. Okay. I'm going to put on show a question that just came in. I'll come back to finishing the self-care, but Jim sends in this question. It says, in my book, The Long Distance Leader, you talk about the importance of adopting technology. Do you have any ideas about what's being called Zoom fatigue, how to lead through the video camera? Well, first of all, thank you, Jim, for that. Let me say this. I'm a big fan of the video cam. And before March, we spent a lot of time telling people, man, get people to turn on their cameras. And the Zoom fatigue thing says we're turning on our cameras, and now we're tired of using them all of the time. So let me give you a few thoughts about this. First of all, the research is showing us that meetings are getting more efficient. I don't know if they're always better, but a lot of folks are finding that they're getting more done in less time in their meetings. So the meetings are getting shorter. That's good, but there's more of them. And not only are there more meetings, but all of them are in this format, right? So it's important for us to recognize that we're just spending more time on the computer. And before we were spending time on the computer and then going to meetings. Now we're spending time on the computer and having our meetings on the computer too. So it's no doubt that we're going to have the fatigue. The fatigue, though, isn't just about Zoom. It's just about the screens. Getting up, taking care of ourselves by getting around, getting away from the screens, all those things. Okay. But here's another thing about the Zoom fatigue. Think about how you're using the cameras in your meetings. Maybe you don't want to see everybody in Brady Bunch view. Maybe you want to see the active speaker. Maybe you want to set it, whether it's in Zoom or whatever tool you're using, so you don't have to see yourself. And so think about where the fatigue is coming from for you. Is it just purely how many times or how those come across? So think about how you can use, don't not use the video, please, because it helps us in so many other ways. Like if you're here, this is more engaging and more effective, hopefully, because you can see me than if you were just hearing me. It was a podcast. So take care of what's causing the Zoom fatigue for you. Is it number, an amount? Is it just eye strain? Is it the seeing in the video? So think about what the issues are and work from there. So Jim, hopefully that's helpful. If you want a little bit more, just ask another question. I'd really appreciate that. Back to taking care of yourself. I was saying to grant yourself some grace, just like you grant grace to others. Maybe that word doesn't mean a lot to you. It means a whole lot to me about being patient and giving yourself a break and recognizing that you can't be and won't be perfect. If we'll do that, that's practicing self-care. Two more things. One is that there are a lot of things in our world right now that are out of our ability to control and influence. The fact that there's a pandemic, none of us can influence. What we can influence is how we respond to it. What we can influence is how we work with our teams to be successful through it. I have been saying to people and to our team, we were going to be positive and proactive throughout this. Those two things we can influence. And so focusing on what we can influence will actually help us take care of ourselves, because we'll recognize that there's some things we can't influence outside of that. And so keeping that clear and recognizing that will be very helpful to you. And the last thing I want to talk about in terms of self-care, I keep looking down to think, like, how do I say this? Because I'm going to say, I want you to be careful with social media. And the reason I'm laughing at myself is because you're on social media watching it. I would like to hope that if you're here watching this, that's actually feeding you, or it's actually helpful to you. The point that I want to make about social media is this. If the things in your feed are feeding you, if it's getting you to positive thoughts and positive interactions and the chance to remain socially close even though we're physically distant, then by all means stay on your social media. But if there's a channel that brings you down, if there's a channel that creates anxiety or bothers you, if there are people that you should stop following, or if there's just a time when I just can't handle this, it's not helping me, then turn it off. If social media can help you and feed you and encourage you, go for it. If it can't, turn it off. Now, I hope that this falls into the first category, not the second. But I don't think I could talk about self-care in this time without bringing that up. So I promised you three things today, three things that you can do as a remote leader, that you can do today, that you can do right now. And we've talked about those. So you got to understand and balance and prioritize the work and the needs of the folks. We got to learn to be flexible and balance those two things. The second thing I talked about was being empathetic. And lastly, we talked about taking care of yourself, because if we can't give our best to others unless we're at our best ourselves. So I hope that you found this useful. And there's actually a fourth thing that you need to do right now as a remote leader, is to go register for Virtual LeaderCon. You can see the button up there at the top, and here's the link to go learn more about Virtual LeaderCon. Virtual LeaderCon is the first of its kind virtually delivered Broadcast Leadership Development Conference. Now, there's lots of virtual conference stuff happening, none being done quite the way we're doing, none with more than 30 leadership experts over the course of 5 days, September 14th through 18th. You can get all the details. I am so excited that our team is putting this together. I was working today on the programming for how it's all going to be. It's going to be fantastic, and we hope that you'll choose to join us. You can learn all about it and how you can get registered for free to have access to all of those experts. virtualleadercon.com. Hope you'll join us there. And I'll be back next Monday with another Live with Kevin. And I'm going to have an executive coach on with me. Her name is Beth Miller, and we're going to talk about how coaching can help us during this time. It's going to be great. Whatever channel you're watching on now, you can watch us on then. 12:05 Eastern Time on Monday. Until then, have a great day. Have a great weekend. Be well and be remarkable.